April 2003. A car abandoned by the edge of Lake Briar. A torn pair of jeans streaked with blood. And a young woman who never made it home. Her name was Amanda Keller, 20 years old, a promising university student, and the pride of her family. On the night of April 14th, she left her evening shift at a small café in Brookhaven, Texas, and set off toward home. Somewhere along the short drive, Amanda vanished. By sunrise, her silver Toyota Corolla was discovered near the entrance to Lake Briar State Park. Inside were her purse, wallet, and cell phone, items she would never willingly leave behind. Just yards away lay a pair of Amanda's jeans, torn and stained with blood. What began as a missing persons case quickly spiraled into one of Brookhaven's darkest mysteries, a story that would haunt the town for 2 decades. As we open this case file together, remember to like and subscribe to the Cold Case Archive, so stories like this are never forgotten. April in Texas carries a deceptive calm. The air is warm but not yet oppressive, the scent of blooming wildflowers drifts across fields, and cicadas hum their steady chorus at dusk. In the small town of Brookhaven, about an hour outside Houston, life in 2003 was measured in routines. School runs, church gatherings, Friday night football, and the kind of neighborly familiarity that made residents feel insulated from the darker headlines of the outside world. It was a place where people waved to each other from porches, left their doors unlocked, and trusted that tomorrow would look very much like today. For Amanda Keller, Brookhaven was more than her hometown, it was her anchor. She was studying environmental science at the University of Texas at Austin, drawn to the natural world from the time she was a child. She had been fascinated with water ecosystems, collecting shells and sketching fish when her family vacationed along the Gulf Coast. She dreamed of one day working in conservation, perhaps traveling the world to protect fragile coastlines. Amanda was bright, focused, and deeply connected to her family. She often returned home to Brookhaven to visit her parents, Robert and Susan Keller, and to work part-time at a small café downtown. Her life was balanced between academics, family ties, and her passion for the environment. On Monday, April 14, 2003, Amanda worked the evening shift at the café. It was a typical night, the dinner crowd filtering in and out, teenagers gathering after school, and the smell of coffee lingering in the air. Co-workers remembered Amanda laughing, talking about an upcoming biology project, and mentioning she might stop at Lake Briar State Park afterward. The park was her sanctuary, a place where she liked to read, reflect, and escape the pressures of campus life. At 9:30 p.m., Amanda clocked out, tossed her apron into the back room, and stepped into the warm night air. She waved goodbye to her manager before climbing into her Corolla. She had promised Susan she would be home before midnight, but Amanda never arrived. By sunrise the next morning, Susan knew something was wrong. Amanda was dependable, not the kind of daughter who vanished without a word. When Robert left work to join the frantic search, the Kellers began calling Amanda's friends, professors, and anyone who might have seen her. By 8 a.m., they reported her missing to the Bay County Sheriff's Office. Within hours, a patrol deputy made a discovery that confirmed the family's worst fears. Amanda's car was found abandoned on a dirt access road near the entrance to Lake Briar State Park. It sat partially concealed by trees as though hurriedly parked. The car was unlocked. Inside were Amanda's purse, her wallet, and her cell phone, objects she would never willingly leave behind. Her car keys, however, were gone. Not far from the vehicle, deputies discovered something chilling, a pair of torn jeans lying in the dirt. They were Amanda's. Streaks of blood stained the fabric. The jeans were immediately bagged and logged into evidence, later sent to the state crime lab for testing. Investigators also documented tire tracks in the mud nearby, distinct from Amanda's Corolla. The impressions suggested a larger vehicle, possibly a truck or SUV, had been at the scene. The area was cordoned off as crime scene tape fluttered in the wind. Detectives marked every footprint, photographed every angle, and searched for additional evidence. The search for Amanda began in earnest. The Bay County Sheriff's Office wasted no time. Helicopters circled over the sprawling park, their spotlights slicing through tree canopies. Volunteers and deputies moved in lines across the brush, cadaver dogs leading the way. Boats cut across the still water of Lake Briar, divers plunging below in hopes of finding clues. The search went on for hours, stretching into days. Hundreds of residents turned out to help, combing through fields, wooded trails, and shallow creeks. Local businesses donated food and supplies for volunteers. Churches opened their doors for prayer circles. Despite the massive effort, there was no sign of Amanda. Each day ended with the same devastating result: nothing. News of Amanda's disappearance spread quickly. Brookhaven was not the kind of place where young women went missing. The idea that someone could vanish so close to home rattled the community to its core. Flyers with Amanda's photo, brown hair, bright smile, were plastered across storefronts and telephone poles. Her face appeared nightly on the local news, her story soon picked up by stations in Houston and Dallas. Candlelight vigils drew hundreds, neighbors clutching candles and whispering prayers under the oak trees downtown. At the center of it all were Robert and Susan Keller. Susan, holding Amanda's picture tight to her chest, pleaded for information through tears. Robert, struggling to keep his composure, urged anyone with knowledge to come forward. Their grief played out in front of cameras, transforming a private family tragedy into a very public story. Rumors began to swirl almost immediately. Some speculated Amanda had been taken by a stranger passing through town. Others whispered she may have left willingly, though her parents dismissed that outright. Amanda had no reason to run. She was thriving academically, surrounded by friends and deeply tied to her family. A few neighbors mentioned seeing Amanda occasionally chatting with a quiet man who lived just down the street. A man who kept to himself, often working odd hours. At the time, no one thought much of it. But years later, those memories would resurface with haunting clarity. As days turned into weeks, the case grew heavier. Detectives sifted through tips and leads, many of them false alarms. A reported sighting of Amanda at a gas station in Houston turned out to be another young woman. A man claimed to have seen her at a bus station, but the description didn't match. Inside the sheriff's office, detectives pored over maps and timelines. They reconstructed Amanda's final hours again and again. The café shift ending at 9:30 p.m., the drive toward Lake Briar, the abandoned car, the bloody jeans. The sequence was clear, but the missing pieces, the why and the who, remained elusive. The lab results confirmed the blood on the jeans belonged to Amanda. More intriguingly, analysts noted traces of male DNA on the waistband. It was logged, preserved, and uploaded to CODIS, the national DNA database. At the time, there was no match. This revelation fueled both hope and despair. The DNA meant Amanda had almost certainly encountered someone else that night. But with no match, investigators had no name, no suspect, no direction. For Robert and Susan, the uncertainty was unbearable. Robert threw himself into search efforts, walking trails near the lake until exhaustion set in. Susan clung to prayer, speaking at vigils, clutching Amanda's childhood Bible. Their home became a revolving door of detectives, reporters, and neighbors delivering casseroles. Behind closed doors, grief consumed them. Nights stretched long. Every ringing phone carried the possibility of news, good or bad. Every knock at the door made their hearts stop. They wanted answers. But the silence grew louder with each passing day. By the end of April, Brookhaven realized the unthinkable. Amanda Keller had not simply gone missing. She had vanished into the shadows of her own hometown. Her car, her purse, her jeans, her blood. Each clue pointed toward violence. Yet none revealed the full picture. The Bay County Sheriff's Office promised the investigation was ongoing. Detectives followed every lead, every rumor. But momentum faded as weeks turned into months. Amanda's disappearance was no longer just a missing persons case. It was becoming something more chilling, a mystery that would haunt Brookhaven for years to come. When someone disappears in a small town, suspicion spreads quickly, almost like smoke drifting through the streets. Within days of Amanda Keller's disappearance, Brookhaven was gripped by rumors, theories, and an undercurrent of fear. And for the Bay County Sheriff's Office, the pressure was overwhelming. The search teams had found Amanda's car abandoned near Lake Briar State Park, her bloody jeans discarded in the dirt. The evidence screamed of foul play, but no one could say who had taken her or why. The case had no anchor, no suspect, until detectives turned their attention to the man many in town already whispered about, Jason Miller. Jason was 22 years old, working as a mechanic at a local auto shop. He had dated Amanda for nearly a year, and their relationship had ended only a month before her disappearance. Friends described him as jealous, even possessive. Amanda's friend Melissa Rodriguez recalled one heated argument she'd overheard. He didn't want her spending time on campus without him. He didn't like her studying late. He always wanted to know where she was. To investigators, Jason was the obvious place to start. When detectives questioned him less than 2 days after Amanda's car was discovered, he seemed tense but cooperative. He claimed he'd been at a friend's house that night watching a basketball game, his alibi supported by 2 friends. Yet something about his demeanor unsettled investigators. He admitted he had tried to contact Amanda after their breakup, hoping to reconcile. She refused. And while he insisted he had accepted her decision, detectives saw a potential motive simmering beneath the surface: rejection. Jason agreed to provide a DNA sample. Detectives believed this could crack the case wide open. If the male DNA found on Amanda's genes matched him, the investigation would be over. Word that Amanda's ex-boyfriend was under scrutiny leaked quickly. Soon, Jason's name was on every tongue in Brookhaven. Local news outlets ran nightly stories with headlines like, "Ex-boyfriend questioned in Keller disappearance." National media picked up the case, intrigued by the image of a young college student vanishing into the night. Jason found himself living under a microscope. At the auto shop, customers whispered. Neighbors looked away. He couldn't pump gas or buy groceries without feeling eyes on him. The town had already decided he was guilty. For Jason's family, it was unbearable. His mother defended him fiercely, insisting the sheriff's office had it wrong. But the tide of public opinion was against him. Brookhaven wanted answers, and Jason fit the narrative too well. Weeks later, the state crime lab returned results on the genes. The bloodstains were confirmed as Amanda's, just as detectives expected. But the DNA from the waistband told a different story. It wasn't Jason's. The revelation blindsided investigators. The man they had spent weeks building their case around, the man the community had already convicted in their minds, was excluded by science. Detectives had to regroup. And Jason, though officially cleared, would never fully shake the stigma of those weeks when everyone believed he had killed Amanda Keller. The exclusion of Jason as a suspect deepened the mystery. If not him, then who? Brookhaven shifted uneasily. Parents began imposing strict curfews. Joggers avoided Lake Briar's trails. Women walked in pairs. Residents who once left their doors unlocked at night now bolted them shut. Rumors filled the vacuum left by hard evidence. Some swore they saw a dark pickup truck leaving the park the night Amanda vanished. Others insisted Amanda had been spotted at a bus station in Houston days later. Detectives chased every lead, only to hit dead ends. The Kellers bore the weight of this uncertainty. Robert Keller spent evenings retracing the trails near the lake, flashlight in hand, searching for something everyone else had missed. Susan clung to vigils and prayer groups, her voice breaking as she begged for her daughter's safe return. But as weeks passed, frustration set in. In one interview, Susan admitted, "I started to wonder if the police had put too much energy into Jason and not enough into the bigger picture. What if the real person just walked away while they were looking at the wrong guy?" The sheriff's office was overwhelmed. With limited manpower, they struggled to sift through the flood of tips. Some were investigated immediately. Others sat on desks for days or weeks. One report came from a park ranger who claimed to have seen a dark-colored truck parked near the dirt road where Amanda's car was found. Detectives interviewed the owner, who explained he'd been night fishing. With no evidence tying him to Amanda, the lead was dropped. Neighbors mentioned a quiet man who lived only a few houses down from the Keller family. He often kept odd hours, sometimes chatting briefly with Amanda when she was outside. Nothing about those encounters seemed sinister, so his name was noted but not pursued. That man was Eric Lawson. At the time, Lawson blended into the background, dismissed as irrelevant. 2 decades later, his name would resurface with chilling significance. By the summer of 2003, momentum was fading. Jason Miller was no longer a suspect, but without him, detectives had no clear alternative. The evidence, Amanda's car, her genes, the unidentified male DNA, had all been processed, logged, and shelved. The case file thickened with interview transcripts, search logs, and lab reports, yet no piece tied together. Cody's offered no matches for the unknown DNA. The trail was cold. For the Kellers, the silence was unbearable. Nights stretched on without answers. Every knock at the door carried hope that quickly dissolved into disappointment. Brookhaven, once defined by its small-town peace, was now scarred by the unanswered question: who took Amanda Keller? By fall, the disappearance of Amanda Keller was no longer front-page news. Other stories filled broadcasts. Volunteers returned to their routines. The vigils grew smaller. For Robert and Susan, the pain did not fade. Susan often sat by Amanda's desk at home, running her hand across her notebooks and sketch pads. Robert kept his boots by the door, ready to walk the trails at a moment's notice. Their daughter's absence was an open wound. And yet, outside their home, the world seemed to move on. Behind the scenes, detectives insisted the case remained open, that tips were still being followed. But the truth was undeniable. The investigation had stalled. Somewhere in Brookhaven, the person responsible for Amanda's disappearance was living quietly, unseen. And the Kellers were left with only questions and the unbearable silence of an empty bedroom. The summer of 2003 arrived with no answers. Amanda Keller had been gone for months, her bloody jeans and abandoned car the only tangible sign she had ever been at Lake Briar that night. The investigation that had begun with urgency and hope now carried the heavy weight of disappointment. For the people of Brookhaven, life slowly resumed its rhythm. Children returned to school. Football games once again filled Friday nights. Businesses reopened their doors without the shadow of news vans outside. But beneath the surface, the wound remained. A young woman had vanished, and no one could say where she was or who had taken her. The Bay County Sheriff's Office insisted the case was still open, but the reality was hard to ignore. They were running out of leads. Jason Miller had been cleared, the DNA from Amanda's genes entered into Cody's with no match, and tips that once flooded the phone lines now came sporadically, often leading nowhere. Detectives followed every possible path in those first years. They interviewed classmates from the University of Texas, co-workers from the café, even distant relatives who hadn't seen Amanda in years. They re-examined the timeline, retraced Amanda's drive to Lake Briar, and searched wooded areas again and again. But each effort ended in silence. By 2005, the case had officially been reclassified as a cold case, though investigators insisted that didn't mean it was forgotten. Files were boxed, stored in cabinets, and pulled out only when new detectives rotated into the unit. Each fresh pair of eyes hoped they might see something overlooked. Each time the conclusion was the same: the trail was cold. The community learned to live with the absence. Amanda's smiling face, once splashed across newspapers and newscasts, appeared only on anniversaries. Every April, local reporters revisited the story, airing interviews with Robert and Susan Keller, showing footage of candlelight vigils. For a night, Amanda's name returned to the headlines. Then just as quickly it disappeared again. For Robert and Susan Keller, the years were measured not in headlines but in heartbreak. Robert threw himself into action. He joined search and rescue organizations, trained with cadaver dog units, and volunteered for missing persons groups. On weekends he walked the trails around Lake Briar, carrying maps and a flashlight, searching for clues he knew he might never find. "I couldn't sit still," he later told a reporter. "If I was sitting, I was thinking. If I was thinking, I was breaking." Susan's grief was quieter but no less consuming. She organized vigils, spoke at awareness events, and kept Amanda's room exactly as it had been the day she left. Her daughter's textbooks remained stacked on the desk. Posters of ocean life still decorated the walls. A half-finished sketch of a fish lay on her nightstand untouched. "I kept it the same," Susan said, "because if she ever walked through that door, I wanted her to feel at home." The strain took its toll. Friends noticed the couple aged faster, the weight of absence etched into their faces. Holidays grew painful. Birthdays passed with empty chairs. And though Robert and Susan leaned on one another, the silence in their home was deafening. Brookhaven, too, carried the weight of Amanda's disappearance. Parents tightened curfews for their children. Joggers avoided the trails at Lake Briar. The carefree feeling that once defined the town never fully returned. Over time, however, fear gave way to resignation. By 2010, many younger residents knew Amanda's name only through whispered warnings. "Don't go out alone at night. Remember what happened to that Keller girl." The story of Amanda Keller became less a headline and more a cautionary tale. Through the years, several detectives cycled through the Bay County Sheriff's Office cold case unit. Each inherited Amanda's thick case file. They read the reports, examined the photographs of the car and jeans, rechecked lab results and retraced interviews. Some detectives believed the case hinged on Amanda's ex-boyfriend, Jason Miller, despite the DNA evidence clearing him. Others suspected a stranger passing through town. A few even considered the possibility that Amanda had been targeted by someone she knew well, someone who lived close enough to watch her habits. But without evidence, suspicion was all they had. In the early 2000s, DNA analysis was powerful but limited. CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, held profiles from convicted offenders, but its reach was not what it would become years later. The unknown male DNA on Amanda's genes remained in the system year after year, checked against every new entry. Each time the answer was the same: no match. As the years passed, technology advanced. By the late 2010s, genetic genealogy emerged as a groundbreaking tool in solving cold cases. Investigators across the country were beginning to solve decades-old murders by tracing DNA through family trees, connecting suspects through relatives who had submitted samples to consumer databases. But in Bay County, Amanda's case remained untouched by this new science, at least for the moment. All the while, Eric Lawson remained in Brookhaven. He was the quiet neighbor mentioned early in the investigation, the man who had lived just a few houses from the Kellers. At the time, detectives noted his name but never pursued him seriously. He had no criminal record, no apparent connection to Amanda beyond casual neighborly exchanges. Lawson lived his life in the background. He held steady jobs, attended community events sporadically, and blended into the rhythms of small-town life. For years, no one looked at him twice. Yet every vigil, every anniversary, every news story about Amanda's disappearance he saw. He lived only streets away from the family that grieved for her. And no one knew that the answers to the mystery were closer than they ever imagined. By 2019, 16 years had passed since Amanda Keller vanished. Robert's hair had gone gray. Susan's voice carried the tremor of long-held sorrow. Their daughter's scholarship applications to graduate school remained in a box on her desk, untouched. The vigils had grown smaller, the news coverage quieter. Amanda's name was still spoken, but mostly by those who had loved her. To younger residents, she was more legend than memory, her story reduced to a line in Brookhaven's history. The case file sat in the sheriff's office, thick with reports, its edges worn from years of handling. The unknown DNA still lingered in CODIS, waiting. And Brookhaven carried on, unaware that the silence surrounding Amanda's case was not permanent. The answers were waiting, hidden in plain sight, ready to be revealed when technology and persistence finally caught up with the truth. For nearly 20 years, Amanda Keller's name had lingered in the quiet spaces of Brookhaven. The vigils had grown smaller, the media attention thinner, but the pain never faded for Robert and Susan Keller. By 2020, they had grown used to living with unanswered questions, though the hope for resolution never truly died. The case file sat on a shelf in the Bay County Sheriff's Office, its edges frayed from years of handling. Inside were photographs of Amanda's Toyota Corolla, the jeans stained with her blood, the transcripts of Jason Miller's interrogations, and the report that had haunted detectives since 2003, the unknown male DNA. For nearly 2 decades, that DNA had been checked against every new entry into CODIS. Each time the result was the same: no match. But science had changed since Amanda disappeared, and in 2021, those changes brought new life to a case thought unsolvable. In the late 2010s, genetic genealogy began transforming the world of criminal investigation. By analyzing DNA and connecting it through family trees built from consumer databases, investigators were able to identify suspects in cases once thought hopeless. Across the country, names long buried in cold files were being pulled into the light. Bay County detectives watched these breakthroughs with interest, but until 2021, they lacked the resources and funding to pursue such technology. That changed when Texas adopted statewide initiatives for using advanced forensic methods in cold cases. Grants were issued. Partnerships with private labs were formed. And suddenly, cases once collecting dust had a chance to breathe again. Among the first files selected was Amanda Keller's. In early 2021, the male DNA recovered from Amanda's genes was sent to a private lab specializing in forensic genealogy. The process was painstaking. Analysts extracted a full profile, compared it against public databases, and began building a genetic family tree. Weeks turned into months as names emerged. Distant relatives, branches of families spread across the South. Slowly, investigators traced the tree backward, narrowing possibilities. Each step brought them closer to the source. By late 2022, One name sat at the intersection of those branches: Eric Lawson. 4 seasoned detectives who had combed through Amanda's case for years, Lawson's name was not new. He had been listed in the earliest reports, noted as a neighbor who occasionally exchanged words with Amanda. But at the time he was dismissed as irrelevant. He had no criminal record, no connection that raised alarms. Now the science pointed directly at him. Lawson was living quietly in Brookhaven, not far from the Keller home. He was 45 years old, employed as a delivery driver, and still carried the reputation of being quiet, polite, and reserved. No one in town suspected he could be involved in Amanda's disappearance. Detectives launched discreet surveillance. They followed Lawson on his routes, observed his habits, and waited for an opportunity to collect a fresh DNA sample. It came in the form of a discarded soda can. In February 2023, forensic analysts compared Lawson's discarded DNA to the sample recovered from Amanda's genes 2 decades earlier. The results were irrefutable. It was a match. The breakthrough sent shockwaves through the Bay County Sheriff's Office. After 20 years of silence, the case finally had a name, a face, and a suspect. Detectives prepared their case carefully. Lawson had lived in Brookhaven all these years, blending into the background while the Kellers grieved just streets away. Now the truth was ready to surface. On March 14, 2023, 2 decades to the month after Amanda's disappearance, deputies surrounded Lawson's small home on Maple Street. Neighbors watched from porches as unmarked cars pulled up quietly in the early morning light. Lawson stepped outside carrying a bag for work when deputies closed in. He was arrested without incident. News of the arrest spread through Brookhaven within hours. For many, the name Eric Lawson meant nothing, just another quiet face in town. But for the Kellers, it was a revelation that left them stunned. The man who had taken their daughter had lived in their neighborhood all along, blending into the ordinary rhythms of their lives. During interrogation, Lawson's calm demeanor cracked. Detectives pressed him with the DNA evidence, the surveillance, the years of lies. At first he denied everything. But the weight of the science was undeniable. Within hours, Lawson confessed. He admitted he had approached Amanda the night she vanished. He had been infatuated with her from a distance, mistaking her kindness for something more. When she rejected his advance, he snapped. In a violent outburst, he attacked her, dragging her toward his truck. Lawson's words were chilling. He claimed the attack was not premeditated, not planned, but a moment of rage. He offered no explanation beyond his own obsession and rejection. For investigators, the confession brought answers but not closure. Amanda's remains had never been found, and Lawson offered only vague descriptions of where he left her. Searches resumed in the areas he mentioned, but no definitive recovery was made. Brookhaven reeled. For years, the community had whispered about Jason Miller, had warned children about strangers, had convinced themselves the danger came from outside. Now they learned the truth had lived among them, unnoticed. Neighbors recalled Lawson as quiet and ordinary. Some remembered him mowing his lawn, waving from his truck, or standing at the edge of vigils, blending into the crowd. The revelation that he was Amanda's killer sent chills through the town. For Robert and Susan Keller, the news was bittersweet. They finally had answers. But those answers were devastating. The man responsible had been someone they might have passed in the grocery store, someone who lived within walking distance of their home. Susan said in a press conference, "We prayed for answers for 20 years. We got them, but it doesn't bring our daughter back. It doesn't give us peace. It just tells us the truth we always feared, that someone took her from us and we'll never get her back." By mid-2023, Lawson was formally charged with the abduction and murder of Amanda Keller. His DNA match, combined with his confession, formed the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Brookhaven braced itself for a trial that would reopen wounds. Reporters returned, news vans lined the streets, and the community once again found itself the focus of national attention. After 20 years of silence, Amanda's case was no longer cold. The truth had surfaced and it would soon be judged in a courtroom. The arrest of Eric Lawson in March 2023 reignited a fire in Brookhaven that had smoldered for 2 decades. News crews descended on the small Texas town, their satellite vans lining the streets. Reporters broadcast live updates from the courthouse steps. For the first time in 20 years, Amanda Keller's case wasn't just an unsolved mystery, it was an unfolding trial that promised answers. For Robert and Susan Keller, The months between Lawson's arrest and his trial were agonizing. Relief that her killer had finally been named was tempered by the painful reality of reliving every detail. They attended pretrial hearings, sat through motions, and watched Lawson in person, quiet, aging, and expressionless. To them, he was not a stranger. He was the neighbor who had lived only streets away, silently carrying the truth. News of Lawson's arrest spread quickly to Jason Miller. For 20 years, he had lived under a cloud of suspicion. Though DNA had cleared him back in 2003, the town never fully forgave or forgot. Some avoided his auto shop, others whispered when he walked past. He bore the weight of being the one who got away with it, in the eyes of too many. When Lawson's name was revealed, Jason spoke publicly for the first time in years. "I knew in my heart I didn't hurt Amanda," he told a reporter. "But that didn't matter. People treated me like I had. I lost jobs, friends, even family drifted. Now the truth's out. I just hope people understand what that was like." His words resonated, underscoring the collateral damage of tunnel vision in investigations. For Jason, the trial of Lawson wasn't just about justice for Amanda, it was a chance to reclaim his own life. Prosecutors built their case meticulously. At the center was the DNA evidence. The male profile recovered from Amanda's genes in 2003, untouched and preserved for 20 years, matched with Lawson's discarded soda can in 2023. Forensic analysts testified to the strength of the match, calling it statistically irrefutable. The prosecution also leaned heavily on Lawson's confession, recorded during interrogation. Though he had not revealed the exact location of Amanda's remains, he admitted to attacking her after she rejected him, dragging her toward his truck, and disposing of her body in a remote area. His words were chilling in their simplicity. "She told me no. I couldn't take it." While the lack of Amanda's recovered remains complicated matters, prosecutors argued the confession, combined with the DNA, was more than enough to secure a conviction. They painted a picture of a predator who lived in plain sight, feeding on obsession, then hiding behind normalcy for 20 years. Lawson's defense attorneys faced an impossible battle. They attempted to cast doubt on the confession, arguing it was coerced under pressure and fatigue. They challenged the chain of custody on the genes, questioning whether evidence preserved for 2 decades could remain uncontaminated. They suggested the DNA only proved contact, not murder. But the weight of science was against them. Every motion was countered with documentation, every claim undermined by the clarity of the evidence. Lawson's own words, flat, unflinching, betrayed him. The jury could hear for themselves his admission of violence. The trial began in August 2023 and lasted 6 weeks. The courtroom was filled daily with townspeople, reporters, and law students observing history. For Robert and Susan Keller, every day was a painful march through testimony that revisited the night their daughter vanished. Forensic experts described the blood evidence on Amanda's genes. Detectives recounted the fruitless searches of 2003, the suspicion placed on Jason Miller, and the decades of silence that followed. Surveillance logs detailed Lawson's life under observation before his arrest. Perhaps the most haunting moment came when prosecutors played the recording of Lawson's confession. His voice, steady and almost detached, filled the courtroom. Robert Keller gripped Susan's hand as tears rolled down her cheeks. 20 years of imagining the final moments of their daughter's life now had a voice. Neighbors testified as well. Some recalled Lawson as polite but distant. Others remembered seeing him at vigils for Amanda, standing silently at the edge of candlelit crowds. The realization that he had watched the family grieve while carrying the secret was unbearable for many. Brookhaven was shaken to its core. For years, people had believed the danger came from outside, a stranger in a truck, a drifter passing through. The truth was far worse. The man responsible lived among them, blending into the ordinary rhythms of town life. Residents who had trusted Lawson, who had waved to him from their porches or accepted packages from his delivery routes, now recoiled at the memory. Some struggled with guilt, wondering how they had never suspected. Others expressed rage that he had hidden for so long undetected. For Amanda's peers, now adults with children of their own, the trial reopened scars. One former classmate said, "We were warned for years to be careful, but we thought the threat was strangers. It was never strangers. It was someone we knew." On September 28, 2023, after 6 weeks of testimony and only 7 hours of deliberation, The jury returned with a verdict, guilty of murder and abduction. As the words were read, Robert and Susan held one another tightly. It was not relief, not in the way they once hoped, but it was an end. The man who had stolen their daughter's life was finally held accountable. Lawson showed no emotion as the sentence was handed down. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, Susan spoke through tears. "We waited 20 years for justice. It doesn't bring Amanda back, but it means she mattered. Her life mattered. And he will never hurt another family." Robert added quietly, "We never stopped fighting for her. Now we can let the courts carry the weight." The Keller family's endurance had carried them through 2 decades of pain. With the verdict, the chapter closed, though the ache of Amanda's absence remained. Jason Miller watched the trial closely, though he did not attend. After the verdict, he gave one final statement to the press. "For 20 years, I lived under suspicion. Today that ends. I hope people finally see I wasn't the monster they thought I was. Amanda deserved the truth. And so did I." His words captured a second layer of justice, the clearing of a man wrongfully accused in the court of public opinion. For Jason, the trial had given him something invaluable, his name back. Brookhaven exhaled when the verdict was announced, but the air was heavy. The town had carried Amanda's story for 20 years, and the truth cut deeply. They learned their assumptions had blinded them. They learned their neighbor was capable of unspeakable violence. Yet they also saw the power of persistence, of science, of a community unwilling to let Amanda's memory fade. In the weeks following the verdict, vigils once again filled the town square. But this time, candles burned not only for Amanda, but for justice, delayed but not denied. The verdict in September 2023 closed the courtroom chapter of Amanda Keller's case, but the story did not end there. For the Keller family, for Brookhaven, and for countless others who followed the case, the journey was about more than a conviction. It was about the enduring power of persistence, the evolution of science, and the determination to ensure Amanda's life carried meaning beyond her tragic end. In the weeks after the trial, Robert and Susan Keller found themselves reflecting on Amanda not as a victim, but as the young woman she had been. They spoke often of her passion for marine biology, her love of sketching the wildlife around Lake Briar, and her dreams of working in ocean conservation. "She wanted to make the world better," Susan told a reporter. "She cared about the little things, plants, animals, every living thing. We don't want her to only be remembered for how she was taken. We want her remembered for how she lived." To honor that, the family partnered with the University of Texas to establish the Amanda Keller Marine Biology Scholarship, awarded annually to students pursuing careers in conservation and environmental science. At its first awarding in 2024, Susan spoke tearfully to the recipients, "You carry her dream forward. Every discovery you make, every ocean you protect, that's Amanda's legacy living on through you." The scholarship became more than financial aid. It became a symbol of resilience, a way to ensure Amanda's light continued to shine. Brookhaven, too, began the process of healing. For 2 decades, the town had carried Amanda's story as an open wound, her face on missing posters, her name whispered in fear. Now, with Lawson behind bars, there was space for reflection. Vigils took on new meaning. Candles no longer flickered in search of answers but in recognition of justice achieved. The town square, once the backdrop for grief, became a gathering place for remembrance and solidarity. Yet healing was complicated. Many struggled with the realization that the killer had lived among them. Some neighbors admitted guilt, recalling Lawson at community events, at vigils, even exchanging small talk in grocery store aisles. "We were looking for a monster," one resident said. But monsters don't always look like monsters. The shock gave way to resolve. Brookhaven became a strong advocate for cold case units, pushing for continued funding and resources so that other families would not endure decades of silence. For the Bay County Sheriff's Office, Amanda's case became a stark reminder of the dangers of tunnel vision. In 2003, suspicion had fallen heavily on Jason Miller. Though DNA cleared him, the shadow of that suspicion lingered for years, damaging his reputation and life. At a press conference after Lawson's conviction, Sheriff Michael Reyes addressed this directly. "We must never forget the importance of following the evidence, not assumptions. We owe that to Amanda. We owe that to Jason. And we owe it to every family still waiting for answers." The case also underscored the importance of preserving evidence. Had Amanda's genes not been carefully logged, stored, and maintained, the DNA profile might have been lost. Instead, it became the key to unlocking the truth 2 decades later. Most significantly, the case highlighted the power of genetic genealogy. What once seemed like science fiction had become an indispensable tool. Amanda's case was cited in state and national discussions about expanding funding for forensic genealogy, ensuring that other cold cases could benefit from the same breakthroughs. Amanda's story resonated far beyond Brookhaven. Advocacy groups for missing persons highlighted her case as an example of why no cold case should be forgotten. Families in similar situations drew hope from the fact that even after 20 years, answers were possible. Universities, nonprofits, and community organizations began inviting the Kellers to speak at events, sharing their journey of grief, endurance, and eventual justice. Susan often spoke to families of the missing, telling them, "Don't give up. The silence doesn't mean the story is over. Science is changing every day. Your answers may come." Amanda's name became tied not only to tragedy but also to progress, a reminder that persistence and innovation could pierce even the darkest mysteries. For Jason Miller, Lawson's conviction offered something he had long been denied: peace. Though he knew the whispers might never fully disappear, the truth was now undeniable. He had been innocent all along. Jason returned to his work at the auto shop, his life quieter but lighter. In an interview he admitted, "I'll never get back the years people doubted me. But I'm glad Amanda's family finally knows the truth. That's what matters most." His story became part of the case's legacy too, a reminder of the harm caused by premature assumptions and the importance of letting evidence guide justice. Despite the conviction, one question remained unresolved. Where was Amanda? Lawson's confession described disposing of her body in a remote area, but searches in those locations yielded nothing definitive. For Robert and Susan, this absence was a wound that never fully closed. Each year, they continued to walk the trails around Lake Briar, laying flowers by the water's edge. "We want her home," Robert said quietly. "We want a place to lay her to rest. Until then, we'll keep searching." The lack of recovery did not diminish the conviction, but it left an ache, an empty chair that no verdict could fill. In the years following Lawson's sentencing, Amanda's name lived on through the scholarship, through community vigils, and through the national conversation sparked by her case. Brookhaven carried her memory forward, refusing to let her story be defined solely by violence. Amanda's life became a reminder of resilience. Her death became a catalyst for change. And her family's unwavering determination became a beacon for others walking the same painful road. Looking back, Amanda's case was more than a crime. It was a story of a family's love, a community's grief, a justice system's flaws, and science's power to transform despair into answers. From the night of her disappearance in April 2003 to the conviction in 2023, 2 decades passed. 2 decades of silence, suspicion, and sorrow. 2 decades of waiting for a truth that finally came. Amanda Keller will forever be remembered not only for the tragedy of her loss but for the strength of those who refused to let her name fade. Her legacy endures, in the oceans she dreamed of protecting, in the students who carry her scholarship forward, and in the lives of families who now believe that justice, no matter how delayed, is still possible. This has been the Cold Case Archive. Thank you for joining us as we preserve these stories one file at a time. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that the memory of these cases lives on.